family is the only family with troubles, you're wrong. We all have problems. And it is imperative, if we're going to change this country, to have the guts to stand up and talk about our lives and to talk about the need to transform this country to start addressing the problems that we have. And the more people get up and say, you know, this is what's going on in my family, and that's what's going on in my neighbor's family, that's when we begin to make progress. And when we push issues under the rug and we try to turn our backs away from the real issues, then we get into trouble. And let me also take this moment to thank the people of New Hampshire. During the Democratic presidential primary, you were there, and you were there big time. And what you did in giving us a very strong victory here in New Hampshire is you helped us develop the momentum which took us around the country and taken on the entire political and economic establishment. We ended up winning 22 states, 13 million votes. And maybe most importantly, the overwhelming support of the young people of this country, the future of America. You know, politics is not complicated, and sometimes we've got to fight our way through the media who try to talk about every damn thing in the world except what is most important.
That's right.
And what our job is to simply lay the issues out on the table, to have respectful dialogue with other people and see how we address it in order to create a better nation. That's about it. That's all that politics is about. And one thing I know for sure, and I know that you know it, is that what this country is about is not dividing us up by the color of our skin, by our sexual orientation, by our gender, or by the nation in which we were born. And of all of my disagreements with Trump, and they are myriad, the one that galls me the most is his attempt to win votes by dividing us up. This country has fought, good people, for hundreds of years, literally hundreds of years, have fought to try to bring us together to end the racism and the sexism and the homophobia and the xenophobia, which we have experienced throughout our history. Good people stood up and said, no, you can't be prejudiced against the Irish or the Italians or the Jews or the blacks or Latinos or gay people. We are human beings. We share our common humanity. And now we have a president, in order to win some cheap political points among his base, is trying to do what no other president in the modern history have done. Even conservative Republicans have not done that. And our job is to tell Donald Trump he is not going to get away with that. He is not going to divide us up. We are going to come together as one people. And on that issue, let me just mention something to you which worries me very much, is that Trump may be on the verge, if media reports are correct, of doing something which may be the ugliest and most cruel decision, domestic decision, that a president of the United States has made in the modern history of this country, and that is to repeal the DACA provision, to take away legal status from 800,000 exemplary, wonderful young people who were raised in the United States, who know this country as the only country that they have ever gone to school in, have ever lived in. And if Trump goes forward with that ugly, ugly decision, I promise you that many of us in the Senate and the House will work overtime to pass legislation to nullify what Trump has done. Today is Labor Day. Today is Labor Day, and the essence of what the labor movement is about is solidarity, is standing together. So we stand with the young people who are in the DACA program. We stand with the transgender community in which Trump is trying to deny those people the right to serve in the U.S. military. We stand with the women of this country who are under extreme pressure, losing their rights to control their own bodies. Trump's idea of America is to divide us up. Our job is to bring people together. There is a lot of anger in this country. And that anger in many respects is justified because people in New Hampshire, people in Vermont, they look out in the world in front of them. What do they see? They see that we are living in the wealthiest nation in the history of the world, but they're seeing almost all of that wealth and income going to the people on top. And whether it is New Hampshire or Vermont or any place else in this country, people are asking themselves, why is it that we are working longer hours for lower wages? Why is it that we have to work 2 or 3 jobs in order to make a living? Why do we have to work 50 or 60 hours in order to support our families? And our job, just as Nikki has done, to bring forth issues that are painful, is to bring the real issues out on the table. And one of those issues is that in America today, we have a disgraceful and immoral level of income and wealth inequality, and we must address that issue. We have got to ask ourselves whether we are satisfied of an economy in which the top 1/10 of 1% now owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. Satisfied with an economy in which the 20 wealthiest people own more wealth than the bottom half of America, where one family, the Walton family of Walmart, owns more wealth than the bottom 40% of the American people. At a time when mom is working in most families, dad is working, kids are often working. We have got to ask ourselves whether we are satisfied with 52% of all new income being generated today going to the top 1%. And our job, and this is tough stuff, because we're taking on very powerful, wealthy special interests. Our job is to create an economy that works for all of us, not just the 1%. Now, Donald Trump and his Republican friends in the coming weeks, they're going to be talking about quote-unquote tax reform. And I want you all to know what their tax reform is about. Their tax reform is about giving trillions of dollars over a 10-year period in tax breaks to the wealthiest people in this country at the same time as their budget would cut Pell Grants and after-school programs and environmental protection and education for our kids. We're going to stand up to that disastrous set of priorities, and we're going to defeat them in the same way we defeated their ugly health care proposals. Now, the way we transform America and the way we win elections is not complicated. We develop a progressive agenda which speaks to the needs of working families. That's what it is. And it is an agenda that has the courage to stand up to the greed of Wall Street, of the insurance companies, of the drug companies, and of the fossil fuel industry. Our agenda is to look about us and see what is going on. This is America, and for the little children of this country and for their parents, those kids have the right to get the best preschool and child care available at affordable costs. And when we talk about the needs of working people, let us be as clear as we can be. A $7.25 federal minimum wage is a starvation wage, and we're going to replace it with a living wage, $15 an hour. As all of you know, and what rights and democracy and any grassroots organization is about, is the profound understanding that change, real change, never takes place from the top on down. It always takes place from the bottom on up. And there is no better example of that than the Fight for 15 movement and the trade union movement, which has supported that effort. Now, I want you all to think about this for a moment. Think about it for a moment, because this is how real change takes place. If we were here 5 or 6 years ago, and I stood before you in Concord and I said, you know what, I think we should raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, you would have thought that I was crazy. Because that is more than doubling the federal minimum wage. Never happened. But what has occurred all over this nation is young people, people in the fast food industry, they went out on strike and they demonstrated and they stood up and told their fellow Americans, we can't make it on $8 an hour or $9 an hour. We need $15 an hour and union representation. And then you know what started to happen? What started to happen is communities began to listen to them and say, you know what, you're right. Nobody can live on $8, $9 an hour, certainly not $7.25. And up in Seattle and in San Francisco and in communities all over this country, legislation was passed moving us toward $15 an hour. And I want to tell you that what seemed utopian, unrealistic a few years ago, is the reality that I just introduced legislation in the Senate, federal minimum wage, $15 an hour. It now has 31 co-sponsors in the United States Senate. So the point is that what seems unrealistic and utopian today becomes very realistic if millions of people demand that change. And that's what we have got to do. Think big, not small. Create the kind of nation that we know we can become. Now, it's not just raising the minimum wage. We have to deal with sexism in the workforce. Women today are making 80 cents on the dollar compared to men. Unacceptable. Equal pay for equal work. And when we talk about a progressive agenda, we're talking about the need to create millions and millions of good-paying jobs. And the fastest way we do that is to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, our roads and our bridges and our rail system and our wastewater plants, and build the affordable housing that millions of Americans desperately need. And again, this is how change takes place. 3 years ago, I introduced legislation, an idea. I said, look, let's rebuild the infrastructure. $1 trillion over 10 years creates 13 million jobs. And my colleagues said, oh, Bernie, you're crazy. You can't come up with that number. It's too big. It's too ambitious. Get your act together, Bernie. Well, 3 years have come and gone. And now in Washington, frankly, whether you're a Democrat or Republican. The number is $1 trillion, 15 million jobs, rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure. And when we talk about jobs, it is imperative that we take a hard look at our disastrous trade policies, demand that corporate America start investing in the United States of America, not just Mexico, China, and other low-wage countries. Our job is to help the poor people of the world do better, not to sink the middle class of this country. And when we talk about why the middle class is in decline, the reason is not complicated. Today we have a government, and we have governments all over this country, the local, state, certainly at the federal level, who see their job as to represent the wealthiest and most powerful people in this country rather than the middle class. And that situation, that process has been exacerbated by this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision. Now, we in New England know a little bit about grassroots democracy because we have town meetings every year. And people come together and they argue about how much they want to spend on the roads or on education or whatever. And then each person raises their hand in support of what he or she believes. It's called one person, one vote. And that is the democracy that we believe in. One person, one vote, not billionaires buying elections. So when we talk about transforming our economy and creating an economy that works for working people, not just the rich, we have also got to be mindful we cannot do it unless we transform and revitalize American democracy. And that means overturning Citizens United, moving to public funding of elections. It means empowering people. We now have one of the lowest voter turnouts of any major country on earth. And many people are saying, my vote doesn't matter. Koch brothers are going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars. I get one vote. I have no power. Our job is to revitalize American democracy. And when we do that, we've got to take on every Republican governor in this country who is actively pushing voter suppression. Yes. You know, this is an issue that gets to me. This is an issue that gets to me and on a personal level really upsets me. I have run for office many, many times in Vermont. Sometimes I've lost, sometimes I have won. But it has never, ever occurred to me to go out of my way to figure out what parts of the state might vote against me and figure out how we can prevent those people from voting. If you run for office, you better run on your ideas, not trying to prevent people from voting. And I say to any politician in this country, if you don't have the guts to run for office on your ideas, and if you're spending your time trying to prevent people of color or low-income people or young people or old people from voting, if that's how you think you can win, you better get out of politics and get another job. Brothers and sisters, we are the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people as a right. And in my view, that international embarrassment has got to end. Today, despite the gains of the Affordable Care Act, 28 million people have no health insurance, and many of you are underinsured with high deductibles and high co-payments.
That's right.
An ugly truth that you're not going to see on TV very often is that tens of thousands of Americans die every single year because they don't go to the doctor when they should. And I've talked to doctors in Vermont and all over this country, and they say patients come in and they are very, very sick. And the doctor says, well, why didn't you come in when you first noticed your symptoms? And the patient will say, well, I didn't have any health insurance, or my deductible was so high I couldn't afford to come in. Some of those people will end up in the hospital being much sicker than they should have been. Some of them will die. In my view, as a nation, we've got to have to take a deep breath and come to the conclusion that health care is a human right for all of us, not a privilege for the wealthy. And that means whether you're rich or you're poor, you're young or you're old, whether you are healthy today or sick tomorrow, what it means is that every person in this country should have the right to go to the doctor when he or she needs to go to the doctor and not worry about how you're going to pay that bill. And every American who gets sick and ends up in the hospital should know that they're not going to go bankrupt. They're not going to have to pay off tens of thousands of dollars in debt, because in this country, health care will be a right of all people. But it is not only the moral issue. It's not only the moral issue of health care as a right. It is an economic issue as well. I want all of you to think about how it happens that in America we end up spending almost twice as much per person on health care as do the people of any other nation. We are spending now close to $10,000 per person on health care. We pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. And at the end of all of that, our health care outcomes, in terms of life expectancy, in terms of infant mortality, are worse than many other countries around this globe. Our job now is to pass a Medicare for all single-payer system. And that is the legislation that I will be offering in a week and a half. And this is legislation that will transform America. It'll take the burden of healthcare expenses off the backs of individual people. It will tell small businesses they don't have to spend half of their lives worrying about how they can find health care for their employees. It will say to people all across America, and there are millions of them, you don't have to stay in a job you don't like just because you get decent health care on that job. That's what health care for all is about. We want a health care system, and this is not easy stuff. And no country has solved it, and nobody ever will. It's tough stuff. But we want a health care system which is designed to provide health care for all people, quality care in a cost-effective way. What we don't want is the continuation of the dysfunctional system we have now, which is designed to provide billions in profits for the insurance companies and the drug companies. That's a system we can live without. Now, to go forward for a Medicare for all system is going to be a monumental struggle, because what we are trying to do is pass the most significant piece of legislation passed probably since Social Security in the 1930s. We're going to be taking on all of the greed and all of the power and all of the money, and they have endless supplies of money, of the drug companies and of the insurance companies and the medical equipment suppliers and Wall Street. All of the people today who make billions in profits, all of the CEOs who make millions a year in compensation packages,